Good evening, dear listener. Dim the lights, settle into stillness, and let the world slow its pace. Tonight's mystery unfolds behind velvet masks and candle-lit corridors where secrets move quietly, and one life ends when the clock strikes midnight. This is Hercule Mysteries, and tonight's story is Murder During the Midnight Masquerade at Thornhill Estate. Chapter 1, The Masquerade Before the Chime. The night had dressed itself for deception. A thin mist drifted across the long drive to Thornhill Estate, curling around iron gates and trimmed hedges, as though the countryside wished to hide its own edges. The manor rose beyond the trees with the quiet certainty of old money, stone walls softened by ivy, tall windows glowing like watchful eyes, and lanterns set at careful intervals to guide guests toward the entrance. Everything was prepared, not only for celebration, but for performance. The sort of performance where people did not arrive as themselves, but as what they wished to be for one evening. Mysterious, untouchable, new. Carriages and motor cars rolled in with gentle restraint. Engines hushed, doors opened, shoes stepped onto gravel, laughter arrived in low waves, polite and practiced. The estate received them all without surprise, as though Thornhill had been holding its breath for weeks, and now released it in measured portions. Inside, the foyer smelled of beeswax and winter roses. The air was warm but never stifling. It held the subtle scent of perfume, candle smoke, and polished wood, an atmosphere that suggested comfort with a hint of ceremony. A pair of footmen in dark livery accepted coats and invitations. A string quartet played softly from the gallery above, the notes drifting down like ribbon, gentle enough to soothe, elegant enough to impress, and in the center of it all, quietly distinct even without effort, stood Hercule Poirot. He had arrived without fanfare as he preferred. His suit was impeccable, his shoes polished with care, his moustache arranged with that precise devotion that some men reserved for prayer. Around him, masks moved like a living artwork, feathers, velvet, gold leaf, porcelain white, and deep black, each one designed to conceal a face while revealing a personality. Poirot did not wear a mask. He did not need one. His expression, as always, was calm and observant, pleasant to strangers, reassuring to hosts, and inconvenient to liars. At the foot of the grand staircase, Lady Maribel Thornhill greeted him with warmth that had the faintest edge of urgency. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice like satin pulled gently across a polished surface. "How very kind of you to come." Poirot bowed slightly. "Madame, when an old house invites me for an evening of mystery, it would be rude to refuse." Lady Maribel smiled, though her eyes remained alert. She wore a silver mask shaped like a crescent moon, delicate filigree tracing her cheekbones and brow. Beneath it, her gaze held the practiced composure of a woman accustomed to managing both guests and secrets. "You see, our little tradition continues," she said, gesturing toward the ballroom doors where laughter and music spilled out in soft brightness. "Yes," Poirot replied. "A masquerade is a charming way to permit people to be honest about their dishonesty." Lady Maribel laughed quietly. "You do not change, monsieur." Poirot's smile was faint. "No, the world changes enough for all of us." The ballroom was a scene arranged like a dream. Chandeliers hung above like glowing constellations. Candlelight lived in every corner, on wall sconces, in tall silver holders, and in clusters along the buffet tables, where crystal caught the flame and turned it into 1,000 small reflections. Guests drifted in pairs and trios, their masks lending them an airy confidence. Some wore Venetian styles with long noses and dramatic brows. Others wore half masks embroidered with sequins that glittered whenever they moved. A few wore full face coverings, sculpted so smoothly that they looked like carved statues rather than living people. All of them spoke with the slight exaggeration of people enjoying their own mystery. Yet beneath the music, beneath the laughter, Poirot heard something else. A subtle tension. Not enough to frighten anyone, not enough to spoil the evening, but present, like a thread drawn too tight in a fine fabric. Poirot did not look for drama, he looked for timing. And the timing tonight, he suspected, was the true centerpiece of Thornhill's masquerade. At the far end of the ballroom stood an antique clock mounted above a marble archway, an heirloom from Thornhill's earliest years. Its face was pale, its numbers painted in dark Roman strokes, its hands moving with dignified patience. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Let the chime guide the night." Poirot paused as he approached it. The clock's tick was audible even through the music if one listened carefully. Tick, 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 a steady rhythm, almost comforting, almost. A man in a deep burgundy cape stood nearby, his mask shaped like a fox, sleek, cunning, with narrow eye slits that made his gaze difficult to read. "A magnificent piece, is it not?" the man asked, voice smooth. Poirot inclined his head politely. "Magnificent, yes, but also demanding." The man's laugh was quiet. "Demanding? It is only a clock." Poirot looked at the plaque again. "Perhaps," Poirot said gently, "but sometimes clocks are used for more than telling time." The fox-masked man tilted his head. "And you are here to accuse clocks?" Poirot smiled faintly. "No, monsieur, I am here to observe people who accuse themselves." The man's posture stiffened subtly. Then he turned away into the crowd, leaving behind the faint impression of someone who did not enjoy being seen too clearly. Poirot watched him go, thoughtful. Lady Maribel introduced Poirot to several guests, each with a carefully chosen title and lightly disguised interest. There was Colonel Giles Harrow, retired military, wearing a black mask trimmed in gold. His voice carried the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. There was Dr. Selwyn Finch, a physician with soft hands and a gentle smile, wearing a dove-grey mask that made him appear almost saintly. There was Miss Clementine Vale, a widow dressed in dark green velvet, her mask adorned with emerald beads that caught candlelight like distant stars. And then there was Mr. Adrian Wexford. He entered the ballroom late, 10 minutes after 11, wearing a full porcelain mask painted in an expression of permanent calm, a white smile, slightly too perfect, dark eyebrows arched in polite amusement. The mask was beautiful and unnerving. Lady Maribel's voice softened slightly when she spoke his name. "Mr. Wexford is an old friend of the family," she said. Poirot watched Wexford approach. He moved with measured grace, not hurried, not uncertain, the sort of movement that suggested he had planned every step long before he took it. When he bowed to Poirot, the porcelain mask caught the chandelier light and reflected it sharply. "Monsieur Poirot," Wexford said, "I hear you have a talent for seeing beneath surfaces." Poirot's eyes remained calm. "And you, monsieur, have chosen a surface with excellent craftsmanship." Wexford's laugh was soft. "Yes," he said, "one must dress for the occasion." Poirot nodded. "Indeed?" Wexford leaned slightly closer, voice lowered. "Tell me," he murmured, "do you believe a person can commit a perfect crime if no one can recognize them?" Poirot's expression did not change. "A perfect crime," Poirot said gently, "requires more than anonymity. It requires perfection of the mind." Wexford's head tilted. "And is that rare?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Very," he said. For a moment something passed between them, an understanding not warm but clear. Then Wexford drifted away into the crowd, the porcelain smile leaving a strange after-image in Poirot's mind. The music changed. A waltz began, slow, elegant, deliberate. Couples moved onto the floor. Masks turned and tilted under candlelight, their wearers drifting like figures from a painting. Poirot did not dance. He stood at the edge of the room, watching. He watched hands, how they rested on shoulders, how they held glasses, how they touched pockets unconsciously. He watched postures, who leaned in and who leaned back, who held themselves open and who made themselves small. And above all, he watched the clock. The hands crawled. 11:30, 11:45, 11:50. The atmosphere tightened slightly as midnight approached, not because anyone feared midnight, but because midnight was expected. Poirot noticed a recurring behavior. Guests glanced up at the clock, then at one another, then back at the clock again, subtle, brief, as though checking that the world still followed its script. Lady Maribel joined Poirot at the edge of the dance floor. "You are not enjoying yourself, monsieur?" she asked lightly. Poirot smiled. "I enjoy myself very much, madame. I simply enjoy differently." She laughed softly. "And what do you enjoy?" Poirot's gaze lifted to the clock. "The moment," he said, "just before the chime." Lady Maribel's smile faltered for the smallest instant. Poirot noticed. At 11:57 the music softened. not officially, not by announcement, but as though the musicians too felt the approaching moment and adjusted without being asked. Poirot heard a door open somewhere beyond the ballroom, a quiet hinge, careful, controlled. A footstep in the corridor beyond, muffled by carpet. He glanced toward the marble archway beneath the clock. A tall figure in a silver mask moved there briefly, then vanished into the shadows of the gallery. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. At 11:59, the ballroom held a peculiar stillness, despite the people and light and music. It was the stillness of anticipation, the kind of stillness that comes before a curtain rises. Poirot felt it settle across the room like a fine veil. The clock's second hand moved. Tick, tick, tick. Poirot listened. Lady Maribel's gloved fingers tightened around her fan. Then the clock chimed. Chime. Once, twice, 3 times, 4. Each chime clear and resonant, vibrating through chandeliers and floorboards alike. On the 12th chime, something changed. Not loudly, not visibly, but unmistakably. A scream did not break the moment. Instead, the music stopped. One musician perhaps missed a note. The bow faltered. The sound ended in a gentle, unfinished way. And in that sudden, soft silence, a voice, low, shocked, almost disbelieving, said, "Someone has fallen." The crowd shifted. Masks turned. People moved toward the marble archway beneath the clock, their footsteps suddenly louder in the absence of music. Poirot stepped forward at once, calm but quick. He reached the archway and looked down. On the polished floor, near the base of the marble staircase, lay a man in a porcelain mask. The same painted smile, the same calm expression. But beneath it, the body was still. A single white-gloved hand lay open, fingers slightly curled as though releasing something. Beside him, fallen to the floor, was a small object, dark against the marble, a tiny vial. Poirot's eyes moved upward. The clock ticked on, indifferent. Tick, tick, tick. Poirot inhaled slowly. The masquerade had reached its true performance, and the first act had ended, exactly at midnight. Chapter 2, A Corpse Behind the Painted Smile. For a few seconds after the 12th chime, no one moved. It was not shock that held them still, but uncertainty. The masquerade had trained its guests to expect drama, mystery, and theatrical surprise. This moment, quiet, unfinished, strangely polite, did not immediately announce itself as tragedy. The man lay where he had fallen, his porcelain mask intact, its painted smile untouched by gravity or consequence. Candlelight flickered across the marble floor, catching the curve of the mask's cheek, the pale gleam of its lips, the shadow beneath the chin, where life no longer resided. Poirot knelt beside the body with care. He did not touch it yet. He listened. The ballroom behind him breathed again. Soft murmurs, the rustle of fabric, the low, uncertain sounds of people discovering they were no longer guests at a party, but witnesses at a crime. Lady Maribel Thornhill appeared at Poirot's side, her silver mask trembling faintly as she struggled to maintain composure. "Is he—" she began. Poirot raised his hand gently. "Yes, madame," he said softly. "He is dead." The words landed without drama. Lady Maribel closed her eyes for a brief moment. When she opened them again, she was very still. "Adrian," she whispered. "Mr. Wexford." Poirot inclined his head. "He collapsed immediately after the final chime," Poirot said. "No cry, no struggle." A man in a black and gold mask, Colonel Harrow, pushed forward. "Poison," he said with confidence. "Has all the signs of it." Poirot glanced at him. "Perhaps," Poirot said. "But we must not allow confidence to outrun observation." The colonel bristled but said nothing more. Poirot reached for the porcelain mask carefully, holding it between 2 fingers, as though it were a fragile artifact. "May I?" he asked Lady Maribel. She nodded numbly. Poirot lifted the mask. Adrian Wexford's face beneath was pale, his expression oddly peaceful, as though the mask had simply extended itself inward. His eyes were half closed, lashes resting softly against his cheeks. Poirot observed the mouth, no distortion, no tension, no sign of pain. "Very clean," Poirot murmured. Dr. Selwyn Finch knelt opposite him. "I'm a physician," the doctor said quietly. "May I examine him?" Poirot nodded. Dr. Finch checked the pulse, though the gesture was ceremonial now, then examined the pupils, the hands, the neck. "He's been dead only moments," Finch said. "No signs of trauma, no bruising, no marks." Poirot gestured toward the small object on the floor. "The vial," he said. Dr. Finch picked it up carefully. It was no larger than a finger, dark glass with a thin stopper. Empty now. "No label," Finch observed. "But residue inside." Poirot nodded. "A private delivery." Lady Maribel's voice trembled. "Delivered how?" Poirot looked up at the antique clock above them. "At precisely the correct moment," he said. The guests were ushered gently back into the ballroom, not confined, contained. Poirot understood the difference mattered. Some protested lightly, others complied with relief. A masquerade, after all, made it easy to remain anonymous and difficult to feel accountable. Poirot requested the musicians remain. "Please," he said gently, "play something very soft." The strings resumed, hesitant at first, then settling into a slow, unobtrusive melody. Sound, Poirot believed, prevented panic better than silence ever could. Lady Maribel stood near the staircase, hands clasped. "This was meant to be a celebration," she said quietly. Poirot nodded. "Yes, which makes it the perfect cover." Colonel Harrow folded his arms. "You imply one of us did this?" Poirot's gaze was calm. "I imply nothing yet, monsieur. I observe." Poirot turned back to the body. Wexford's hand lay open. Inside it, something small and metallic caught the light. Poirot leaned closer. A watch, not a wristwatch, a pocket watch. Its glass was cracked. The hands were frozen. At 12. Poirot frowned slightly. "That," he murmured, "is curious." Dr. Finch leaned in. "What is?" Poirot held up the watch. "It stopped," he said, "at the moment of death." The colonel scoffed softly. "Hardly surprising." Poirot smiled faintly. "On the contrary," he said, "most watches continue." Poirot rose and addressed the gathered guests. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said gently, his voice carrying without effort, "I must ask you to remain a little while longer. This is most inconvenient, I know, but tonight inconvenience is unavoidable." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Poirot continued. "You have all worn masks this evening," he said. "Some of you will be tempted to believe this grants you distance from what has occurred." He paused. "It does not." Silence followed. Poirot gestured toward the clock. "The murder of Mr. Adrian Wexford occurred at midnight," he said. "Not before, not after. Exactly at the chime." Miss Clementine Vale stepped forward, her emerald mask catching candlelight. "You make it sound planned," she said. Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed," he replied, "a murder timed to the second is rarely spontaneous," Lady Maribel whispered. "But no one was near him." Poirot nodded. "Which is precisely why poison is the chosen instrument," Colonel Harrow snorted. "Anyone could slip poison into a drink at a party like this." Poirot turned toward him. "Could they?" Poirot asked gently. "Or would they require assurance?" The colonel frowned. "Assurance of what?" Poirot's eyes lifted again to the clock. "Of timing," he said. Poirot requested to see the drinks table. Servants complied quickly, their training evident even under strain. Glasses stood in orderly rows, some empty, some half-finished. Poirot examined them carefully. He lifted one glass. Wexford's. "How do you know?" Miss Vale asked. Poirot smiled faintly. "Because," he said, "this is the only glass untouched by condensation." He gestured. "Mr. Wexford did not hold it long." Poirot sniffed the rim. "Almond," he murmured. Dr. Finch stiffened. "Cyanide." Poirot nodded. "Fast, efficient, reliable," he said. "And dramatic enough to perform at midnight." Lady Maribel covered her mouth. "But who—" Poirot raised a finger. "Not yet," he said. Poirot asked the guests to remove their masks. A collective hesitation followed. Poirot's voice remained calm. "Please," he said, "the masquerade is over." One by one, masks came away. Faces emerged, some flushed, some pale, some carefully composed. Colonel Harrow removed his mask with a sharp motion. Dr. Finch's expression was grave. Miss Vale's eyes were thoughtful, distant. Poirot watched each reaction carefully. He was not watching guilt, he was watching relief. Then, last of all, Lady Maribel removed her silver mask. Her face was composed, too composed, Poirot noticed. Poirot turned toward the guests again. "Mr. Wexford arrived late," Poirot said. 10 minutes before midnight." Several nodded. "He wore a full porcelain mask," Poirot continued, "which means he could not drink without removing it. Lady Maribel's eyes flickered. Poirot continued gently. And yet his glass was prepared. Colonel Harrow frowned. Someone handed it to him. Poirot nodded. Yes. Poirot turned slowly. Someone who knew exactly when he would drink, Poirot said. Miss Vale whispered, "The host." Poirot met her gaze. Or someone close enough to predict his movement. The room held its breath. Poirot walked to the base of the staircase and gestured upward. "The clock," he said softly, "did not merely announce midnight. It announced permission." Lady Maribel swayed slightly. Poirot continued. "Whoever prepared the poison did not need to watch Mr. Wexford constantly," he said. "They only needed to trust the chime." Silence. Poirot looked at the frozen pocket watch again. "Mr. Wexford knew something," Poirot murmured. "That is why he carried his own time." Dr. Finch frowned. "What do you mean?" Poirot held up the cracked watch. "He was not trusting Thornhill's clock," Poirot said. "He was checking it." The implication settled. Lady Maribel's voice trembled. "He was afraid," she said. Poirot nodded. "Yes," he said softly. "And fear, mesdames et messieurs, is rarely unearned." The police were summoned quietly. Guests were asked to remain available. The body was covered respectfully, but the ballroom did not return to celebration. It remained a stage, its final act unfinished. Poirot stood alone beneath the clock. He listened. Tick, tick, tick. The clock was accurate, too accurate, which meant someone depended on it. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. "This," he thought, "is a crime of trust. Trust in timing, trust in habit, trust in ritual." And rituals, Poirot knew, always revealed who depended on them most. He opened his eyes. The masquerade was no longer about masks. It was about who had worn the clock as one. Chapter 3, Footsteps Beneath the Ballroom Clock. Once. The body had been covered and the first urgency had softened into procedure. Thornhill Estate revealed a second personality. It became quieter but not calmer. The ballroom lights were lowered slightly, not by instruction but by instinct. Guests spoke in low tones now, their voices carrying the careful politeness of people who understood that every word might later be remembered. Servants moved without haste, as though slowing their steps could delay the weight of what had occurred. Hercule Poirot stood near the marble archway, listening. The clock above him continued its patient work. Tick, tick, tick. It was astonishing, Poirot thought, how quickly a room adjusted to death. Inspector Reeves arrived shortly after midnight, his manner composed and respectful. He was a man who understood when to lead and when to defer, and tonight he deferred instinctively to the small Belgian with the quiet eyes. "We'll keep everyone here," Reeves said softly. "No one leaves the estate." Poirot nodded. "Yes, that is wise." Reeves glanced at the clock. "You believe timing is central." Poirot smiled faintly. "Timing is everything, Inspector, especially when someone believes they can control it." Poirot asked for the music to stop completely, not abruptly, just to end. The musicians lowered their instruments. The final note faded, leaving behind a silence that was not dramatic but attentive, like an audience waiting for the next line. Poirot turned slowly, taking in the assembled guests. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said gently, "I would like to ask you something very simple." They watched him closely. "When the clock chimed," Poirot continued, "where were you standing?" A murmur followed. Poirot raised a hand. "One at a time," he said calmly. "This is not an accusation. It is a measurement." Colonel Harrow spoke first. "I was on the dance floor," he said, "with Miss Vale." Miss Clementine Vale nodded. "Near the center. Everyone could see us." Poirot inclined his head. Dr. Finch spoke next. "I was near the drinks table. I had just set my glass down." Poirot nodded again. "And you, madame?" Poirot asked Lady Maribel. She swallowed. "Near the staircase, greeting guests." Poirot's gaze softened slightly. "And you saw Mr. Wexford?" "Yes," she replied. "He was beneath the clock." Poirot turned. "Who else saw him there?" he asked. Several hands rose hesitantly. Poirot acknowledged them. "Good," he said. "Now tell me, did anyone hear footsteps at that moment?" The question caused a shift. Not fear, recognition. Colonel Harrow frowned. "Footsteps? With all that music?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Yes." with all that music?" Silence followed, then Miss Vale spoke. "I heard something," she said quietly. "I thought it was part of the dance." Poirot nodded. "Where did it come from?" She closed her eyes briefly. "From the gallery above." Poirot looked up. The upper gallery circled the ballroom, its balustrade carved with floral detail softened by age. Guests had wandered there earlier in the evening, enjoying a vantage point from which to observe the masquerade below. Poirot ascended the stairs slowly, his steps deliberate and audible. He paused halfway. "This stair," he said softly, "is not new." Inspector Reeves nodded. "Original to the estate," Poirot smiled. "Yes, which means it speaks honestly." At the top, Poirot stood still. He listened. The gallery was empty now, but it was not silent. Wood creaked faintly. Fabric stirred somewhere, perhaps a curtain adjusting to air. Poirot walked toward the spot directly above the archway and the clock. He stopped. "This," he murmured, "is where the footsteps came from." Inspector Reeves frowned. "But no one was here." Poirot nodded. "No one needed to be." He bent slightly, examining the floor. There, barely visible, were scuffs. Not hurried, not careless, measured. Poirot straightened. "These footsteps," he said, "were not fleeing, they were arriving." Back below, Poirot addressed the guests again. "Mr. Wexford stood beneath the clock," Poirot said. "But he was not alone," Colonel Harrow scoffed. "You just said—" "I said," Poirot corrected gently, "he was not physically alone." A ripple of unease passed through the room. Poirot continued. "Someone was above him," he said, "listening, watching, waiting." Lady Maribel's face drained of color. "You mean—" she began. Poirot nodded. "The gallery allows a clear view, and more importantly, it allows one to hear the clock before the ballroom does." Inspector Reeves frowned. "So someone knew the exact second." Poirot smiled faintly. "Yes," he said. "Before anyone else." Poirot returned to the clock. He studied its casing closely now, not as an ornament, but as a mechanism. He ran his fingers gently along the wood. "May I?" he asked Inspector Reeves. Reeves nodded. Poirot opened a small panel at the side of the clock, hidden but not locked. Inside, the mechanism gleamed softly. Poirot examined it, then he smiled. "Ah," he said quietly. Reeves leaned closer. "What is it?" Poirot pointed. "A delay adjustment," he said. "Subtle, almost invisible." Reeves frowned. "Meaning?" Poirot's voice remained calm. "The chime can be made to sound," he said, "a few seconds earlier than the visible time." A murmur passed through the guests. Poirot closed the panel gently. "Someone," he said, "wanted the chime to arrive before expectation." Lady Maribel whispered, "Why?" Poirot turned to her. "So that a man checking his own watch would believe the moment had come," Poirot said softly. Silence. The cracked pocket watch rested on a nearby table. Poirot held it up. "Mr. Wexford trusted his time," Poirot said, "but he trusted the chime more." Inspector Reeves nodded slowly. "So the poison was taken when he believed it was safe," Poirot finished. Poirot's gaze swept the room again. "This murder," he said gently, "required three things." He raised one finger. "Knowledge of the clock." Another finger. "Access to Mr. Wexford's drink." A third. "And the patience to wait above him, listening to his breathing, his movement, his hesitation." Poirot paused. "Who among you," he asked quietly, "is known for patience?" The room shifted. Colonel Harrow stiffened. Dr. Finch adjusted his cuffs. Miss Vale looked thoughtful rather than afraid. Lady Maribel remained very still. Poirot watched them all. Then he turned toward the gallery again. "Inspector," Poirot said, "I would like the gallery sealed for now." Reeves nodded. "Of course," Poirot smiled faintly. "Good," he said, "because whoever stood there will return there again." Reeves blinked. "Why would they?" Poirot's eyes remained gentle. "Because," he said, "they are not finished listening." As the hour crept past 1, the estate settled into a strange half-rest. Guests were assigned rooms, guards were posted discreetly, servants moved quietly, careful not to disturb more than necessary. Poirot remained awake. He sat beneath the clock, listening. Tick, tick, tick. The clock was accurate again. Too accurate. Poirot closed his eyes. He imagined the scene replayed, not as drama, but as sound. Footsteps above, a held breath, a chime, early by seconds, a man lifting a glass, a body collapsing softly. Poirot opened his eyes. This, he murmured, was rehearsed. And rehearsals, he knew, always left traces. Chapter 4. The guest who never removed his mask. By the time the house settled into its uneasy quiet, Thornhill Estate had learned a new rule. No one moved without being noticed. Doors were closed softly and then left exactly as they were. Curtains were drawn with care. Candles were extinguished one by one until only the necessary lights remained, glowing with the patience of things that did not wish to interfere. The masquerade was finished, but its guests were still wearing its habits. Hercule Poirot walked the length of the gallery alone, his steps measured, his hands folded behind his back. He did not hurry. Haste, he believed, made people careless, and carelessness had already done enough damage for one night. He stopped where the scuff marks were faintly visible. Here, someone had stood, not long, not restlessly, but long enough to wait for a sound they trusted. Poirot closed his eyes and listened. The house answered him with its honest noises, the slow contraction of cooling wood, the whisper of distant fabric, the muted echo of a step far below. No secret signals, no cues, not any more. "That," Poirot murmured, "is the sound of rehearsal ending." Inspector Reeves joined him quietly. "We've accounted for everyone," Reeves said. "All guests are in their rooms. No one admits to being on the gallery at midnight." Poirot nodded. "As expected." Reeves frowned. "You believe someone lied?" Poirot smiled faintly. "I believe someone never intended to tell the truth." They walked together to the staircase. Poirot paused halfway down and looked back toward the gallery. "Inspector," he said softly, "tell me, during the masquerade, did you notice anyone who never removed his mask?" Reeves considered. "Several guests wore full masks." Poirot nodded. "Yes, but only one did so after the body was found." Reeves blinked. "You mean Wexford?" "No," Poirot corrected gently. "Someone else." Reeves frowned, then his eyes widened slightly. "The man in the fox mask," he said slowly. "He disappeared early." Poirot nodded. "He left," Poirot said, "but he did not depart." They returned to the ballroom, now dim and hushed. Chairs stood where they had been abandoned. A glass lay on its side near the dance floor, untouched since the music stopped. The marble staircase gleamed faintly, as though nothing of consequence had ever occurred there. Poirot approached the place where Wexford had fallen. He did not look at the floor. He looked at the space around it. Small detail caught his attention. A faint smear near the balustrade, polished, disturbed, not by a fall, but by a hand resting briefly for balance. Poirot knelt. "A steadying hand," he murmured, "not the victim's." Reeves leaned closer. "You think someone was here with him?" Poirot shook his head. "Near him, close enough to watch." Poirot stood and glanced toward the servants' corridor. "Inspector," he said, "I would like to speak to the footman." The servants gathered with admirable composure. Years of training had taught them how to disappear and how to reappear when summoned, without drawing attention to themselves. Poirot respected this skill. It often meant they saw far more than guests realized. "Please," Poirot said gently, "do not be nervous. I am not asking who committed a crime." The footman relaxed slightly. "I wish to know," Poirot continued, "who watched." A young footman spoke first. "Sir?" Poirot smiled. "During the masquerade, who stood apart? Who did not dance, did not drink, did not laugh?" The footman hesitated. "There was a gentleman," he said slowly, "in a fox mask. He stayed near the pillars." Reeves nodded. "We noticed him," the footman continued. "He did not take refreshments. He asked only about the clock." Poirot's eyes sharpened gently. "What did he ask?" Poirot inquired. "He asked when it had last been serviced," the footman said, "and whether it chimed true." Reeves frowned. "You told him?" "Yes, sir," the footman said. "We said it was inspected only last week." Poirot nodded. "And did he remove his mask at any time?" Poirot asked. The footman shook his head. No, monsieur, not even to drink. Poirot smiled faintly. Thank you, he said. That is all. Later, in a quiet sitting room near the servants' wing, Poirot examined a tray of discarded masks. Some were ornate, some simple, some damp with perspiration, others barely worn at all. Poirot lifted the fox mask carefully. The interior was clean, too clean. This mask, Poirot said softly, was not worn for pleasure. Reeves frowned. Then why wear it? Poirot turned it slightly so the light caught the eye slits. Because, Poirot said, it allowed the wearer to look without being looked at. Reeves' expression tightened. You think this man was watching Wexford? Poirot nodded. Yes, and more importantly, he was watching the clock. They found the guest list. Poirot studied it carefully. Names, titles, connections. Then he stopped. Here, Poirot said quietly. Reeves leaned in. Julian, Caro. Poirot nodded. A distant associate, Poirot said. No close family ties, no clear reason to attend, except curiosity. Reeves frowned. Curiosity about what? Poirot closed the list. About whether the plan would work, he said. The early hours of the morning arrived with a softness that felt undeserved. Thornhill Estate rested uneasily, its guests drifting in and out of sleep, their minds replaying the night's final moments with increasing clarity. Poirot did not sleep. He returned once more to the gallery. This time he sat. He waited. Tick, tick, tick. The clock chimed the hour. 1. Nothing followed. Poirot smiled faintly. Yes, he murmured. You are done with this place. Near dawn, a sound came from the corridor beyond the gallery. Not footsteps. A pause. Poirot did not move. The pause lingered, uncertain. Then, softly, a footstep. Poirot spoke without turning. You may stop now, he said gently. Silence. Poirot continued. There is nothing left to observe. A breath, barely audible, escaped from the darkness. Poirot stood slowly and turned. The man in the fox mask stood near the doorway, frozen between retreat and advance. You never removed your mask, Poirot said calmly. Because you did not come to participate. The man's shoulders tightened. You came, Poirot continued, to confirm timing, to ensure obedience. The man's voice emerged at last, controlled but thin. You cannot prove anything, Poirot nodded. Not yet. He stepped closer, his gaze kind but unwavering. But you listened, Poirot said, and listening leaves traces. The man hesitated, then stepped back. Footsteps retreated. Poirot did not follow. He knew enough. When morning finally arrived, Poirot stood beneath the ballroom clock once more. It ticked evenly now, tick, tick, tick. He reached up and touched the casing lightly. This clock, he murmured, was trusted too much. He stepped away. The guest who never removed his mask had revealed himself not by action but by presence. And presence, Poirot knew, was harder to hide than guilt. Chapter 5, Whispers in the Candlelit Gallery. By the time dawn approached Thornhill Estate, the house had stopped pretending to sleep. It rested instead in that peculiar state between night and morning, when shadows soften but do not disappear, when sound travels farther than it should, and when secrets, long held, begin to loosen their grip simply because they are tired of being carried. The gallery above the ballroom remained empty, too empty. Hercule Poirot stood at its center, hands folded neatly behind his back, his gaze drifting from the carved balustrade to the distant windows, where the first grey light pressed gently against the glass. Below him, the ballroom lay still. The chandeliers no longer glittered. The candles had burned low, their flames reduced to small, obedient points of light. Chairs stood abandoned, where guests had left them in haste or disbelief. A forgotten mask lay beneath a table, its ribbons trailing like loose thoughts. Poirot listened. Not for footsteps, for absence. Inspector Reeves joined him quietly. You were right, Reeves said. No one else came to the gallery after you spoke to him. Poirot nodded. Because he had already confirmed what he needed. Reeves frowned. Which was? Poirot's voice was calm. That the silence had changed, he said, and that the house no longer belonged to him? They walked slowly along the gallery together. Poirot paused near a tall candelabrum. Inspector, he said gently. Has anyone examined the candles? Reeves blinked. The candles? Poirot gestured. Please. A constable fetched one carefully. Poirot examined the wax. Notice, he said softly, how unevenly it has melted. Reeves frowned. Because of drafts. Poirot smiled faintly. Because of movement. Poirot pointed. Along the gallery. Someone paced here, he said. Slowly, regularly. Reeves swallowed. Waiting? Poirot nodded. Yes, he said. Listening for the moment when everything would align. They returned to the ballroom. Poirot requested that the remaining candles be extinguished, except one. A single tall candle near the marble staircase remained lit, its flame steady, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Poirot watched it closely. The human voice, Poirot said softly, travels differently in candlelight. Reeves raised an eyebrow. It carries farther, Poirot continued, and it whispers more clearly. Reeves nodded slowly. You think someone spoke to Wexford? Poirot considered. No, he said. I think someone did not. Poirot walked to the base of the staircase. This is where Mr. Wexford fell, he said. And yet there was no sound of struggle, no protest. Reeves frowned. Poison works quickly, Poirot nodded. Yes, but fear works faster, Poirot bent slightly. A man who expects danger, Poirot said, often betrays it with his voice, even briefly. Reeves looked thoughtful. But Wexford did not cry out, he said. Poirot smiled faintly. Because, he said, he believed the moment was safe. Later that morning, Poirot asked to speak with Miss Clementine Vale. They sat together in a small sitting room off the main hall. The curtains were open now, allowing daylight to soften the edges of the night's memory. Miss Vale removed her gloves carefully before speaking. I have replayed the moment again and again, she said, trying to remember something useful. Poirot nodded encouragingly. You heard footsteps, Poirot said gently. Yes, she replied, above us, but they did not hurry. Poirot smiled faintly. No, he said. They would not. Miss Vale frowned. Why? Poirot leaned back slightly. Because the person who made them was not afraid of being heard, he said. They believed the sound belonged. Miss Vale hesitated. There was something else, she said quietly. Poirot waited. When the clock chimed, she continued, I remember thinking it sounded wrong. Poirot's eyes sharpened gently. Wrong how? She searched for the word. Eager, she said at last, as though it had been waiting to ring. Poirot nodded slowly. Yes, he murmured. That is very important. Dr. Selwyn Finch was next. He appeared tired, but composed. I examined the vile residue, Finch said. Cyanide, as we suspected, administered shortly before death. Poirot nodded. And Mr. Wexford's behavior? Poirot asked. Finch frowned. What do you mean? Poirot's voice remained calm. As a physician, Poirot said, you observe more than you realize. Did he appear unwell? Finch shook his head. No, if anything, he seemed alert, watchful. Poirot smiled faintly. Yes, he said. He was measuring time. Finch hesitated. Measuring against what? Poirot did not answer directly. Tell me, Poirot asked, did Mr. Wexford ever ask you about poisons? Finch stiffened. Once, months ago, hypothetically. Poirot nodded. And did he seem afraid? Finch lowered his gaze. Yes. Poirot thanked him gently. By midday, Thornhill Estate had become a place of quiet reflection rather than spectacle. Guests remained, but they moved slowly, cautiously, as though afraid of stepping on the memory of the night. Servants spoke in whispers, doors closed softly. Poirot returned once more to the gallery, alone. He stood where the fox-masked man had waited. He closed his eyes. He imagined the scene, the measured pacing, the eyes fixed below, the ear tuned to the mechanism inside the clock, the confidence that came from believing time itself was an ally. Poirot opened his eyes. This, he murmured, was not passion. It was not rage. It was not jealousy. It was instruction. Someone had taught Wexford when to act, and someone else had taught the listener how to wait. Late afternoon brought rain, not heavy, not dramatic, just enough to darken the stone and quiet the grounds. Poirot stood near the front window and watched droplets trail down the glass in unhurried paths. Inspector Reeves joined him. "We have confirmation," Reeves said quietly. Julian Carew arrived under an alias, left the estate before dawn. Poirot nodded. "Yes?" Reeves frowned. "We have motive, opportunity, but little direct proof." Poirot smiled faintly. "Proof," he said gently, "does not always arrive first." Reeves looked at him. "Then what does?" Poirot turned. "Understanding," he said. That evening Poirot returned to the ballroom one last time before night fell again. The single candle remained by the staircase. He extinguished it himself. Darkness settled, not heavily but naturally. Poirot listened. The house made its ordinary sounds again. No pacing, no waiting, no listening from above. He nodded to himself. "Yes," he murmured, "the whisper has faded." As night returned to Thornhill Estate, Poirot prepared to rest. The case, he knew, was turning inward now, away from objects and spaces toward minds and habits. The masquerade had ended, the whispering gallery had spoken, and soon, Poirot believed, the truth would speak as well, without raising its voice. Chapter 6. The estate that watched its guests, Thornhill Estate, had always been observant. Long before the masquerade, before the clock chimed and the guests arrived in silken secrecy, the house had learned how to watch. It had been built to do so. Windows placed not merely for light, but for view. Corridors designed to connect without revealing. Staircases that allowed movement without announcement. Hercule Poirot believed houses, like people, learned habits. And Thornhill's habit was attention. Morning light entered the ballroom at a slant, revealing details the night had softened. Scratches on the marble floor where chairs had been dragged aside. A faint footprint near the base of the staircase, half cleaned but not entirely erased. Wax drippings hardened into pale shapes that looked almost intentional now. Poirot walked slowly through the space, alone. He did not hurry. The estate would not reveal itself to impatience. He paused beneath the clock and listened. Tick, tick, tick. The sound was ordinary now. That, Poirot thought, was precisely the problem. Inspector Reeves joined him quietly. "You think the house helped?" Reeves said. Poirot smiled faintly. "No," he said gently. "I think the house was used." Reeves frowned. "Used how?" Poirot gestured around them. "Thornhill is designed to observe without being seen," Poirot said, "which means a person who understands it can move through it like a thought." They began walking together. Poirot stopped near a tall mirror at the edge of the ballroom. Its glass reflected the room imperfectly, bending perspective just enough to distort distance. "This mirror," Poirot said softly, "shows the staircase from 3 angles." Reeves looked. "You can see the clock from here, too." Poirot nodded. "And the gallery," he added. "And the entrance," Reeves exhaled. "So someone could watch everything." "Yes," Poirot replied, without standing anywhere obvious. They moved into the corridor behind the ballroom. The sound changed immediately. Footsteps softened. Voices dropped instinctively. Poirot noticed. "The acoustics," he said. "They encourage discretion." Reeves nodded slowly. The architect knew what he was doing. Poirot smiled faintly. "Perhaps," he said, "or perhaps the family learned to appreciate it." They stopped near a narrow window overlooking the drive. From here one could see arrivals without being seen. Lanterns along the path appeared smaller from this angle, less significant. Poirot rested his hand lightly on the sill. "Mr. Wexford arrived late," Poirot said. 10 minutes before midnight." Reeves nodded. "He did not rush," Poirot continued. "Which means he trusted something." Reeves frowned. "Or someone." Poirot nodded. "Yes," he said softly. Later, Poirot requested access to the estate's old plans. They were kept in a small study lined with leather-bound volumes and dust softened by years of care. Lady Maribel Thornhill brought them herself, her expression composed but tired. "These are the original drawings," she said. "My grandfather insisted they be preserved." Poirot thanked her and examined them carefully. He traced corridors with his finger, paused, then smiled faintly. "Madam," Poirot said gently, "your estate has a listening room." Lady Maribel blinked. What?" Poirot pointed. "Here," he said. "Behind the gallery wall." She leaned closer. "That was once used for musicians?" Poirot nodded. "And later," he said, "for observation." Lady Maribel's face paled slightly. "We rarely use it now," she said. Poirot closed the plans. "That is fortunate," he replied. They entered the narrow space together. The room was long and thin, its walls lined with old fabric panels meant to soften sound. A small opening, hidden behind decorative lattice, looked down into the ballroom. Poirot stood still. He did not speak. He listened. The faintest sounds from below reached them clearly. Footsteps, murmurs, the tick of the clock. Reeves swallowed. "From here, you could hear everything." Poirot nodded. "And see enough," he said, "without being seen." Lady Maribel whispered, "Someone used this." Poirot's voice was gentle. "Yes," he said, "and not for the first time." Poirot examined the floor. There, pressed faintly into the dust, were marks, not shoes, knees. Someone had knelt here for a long time. Reeves stiffened, waiting. Poirot nodded. "Yes," he said, "listening for alignment." Poirot straightened. "The estate," he said softly, "did not commit the crime." He turned. "But it remembers everyone who has practiced within it." That afternoon, Poirot spoke again with Lady Maribel. They sat near the window overlooking the gardens, where trimmed hedges formed quiet patterns that suggested order rather than beauty. "Mr. Wexford was not a happy man," Poirot said gently. Lady Maribel closed her eyes briefly. "No," Poirot continued. "He feared timing," he said, "which means someone once taught him to obey it." Lady Maribel's voice trembled slightly. "Julian Caro spent much time here years ago." Poirot nodded. "He learned from the house," Poirot said, "and from your husband's associates." She opened her eyes. "My husband believed in schedules," she said softly, "in control." Poirot met her gaze. "Yes," he said, "and control, madame, is contagious." As evening approached once more, Poirot returned to the listening room alone. The light faded. The estate grew quiet. He stood where the killer or the planner had stood. He imagined the scene, the gallery below filled with masked guests. The clock prepared to chime, the victim checking his watch, the listener counting seconds. Poirot closed his eyes. "This house," he murmured, "did not demand the crime." He opened them again. "It merely made it easy." Night settled over Thornhill Estate again, but it felt different now. Not watchful, just old. Poirot walked back into the ballroom and looked once more at the staircase, the clock, the open space where the masquerade had ended. The estate had given everything it could. Now it waited to be ordinary again. Poirot nodded. "The watcher," he thought, "has been seen," and soon, he believed, the watcher would be forced to speak. Chapter 7. The Midnight Signal. No one noticed. There are signals that announce themselves. They arrive with bells, with lights, with voices raised to ensure they are heard. They interrupt whatever surrounds them and leave no room for doubt. And then there are signals that pass unnoticed, not because they are quiet, but because they are expected. Hercule Poirot believed the murder at Thornhill Estate belonged to the second kind. The seventh morning after the masquerade dawned without ceremony. Mist clung low to the lawns, settling between hedges like a thought unwilling to form fully. The estate grounds were quiet now, the guests gone, the servants returned to ordinary rhythms. Thornhill breathed again, no longer performing, no longer holding its posture too carefully. Poirot walked the gravel path alone. Each footstep sounded honest. That pleased him. Inside the house, Inspector Reeves waited in the small breakfast room where the windows faced east. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, softening everything it touched. "You think there was a signal," Reeves said, without preamble. Poirot smiled faintly. "I think there were several." Reeves frowned. "We found no bells, no hidden lights, no messages." Poirot nodded. "Yes, because the signal was not added." He sat down calmly. "It was already there." Poirot requested the estate's old wireless set. It had not been used during the masquerade. Lady Maribel insisted upon music played live, believing it added authenticity to the evening. The wireless sat idle now in a small alcove near the servants' corridor, its casing polished but its dials stiff with disuse. Poirot examined it gently. He turned one dial. A faint crackle answered him. Poirot smiled. "This," he said softly, "is where the signal lived." Reeves stared. "But no one heard anything." Poirot nodded. "Exactly." Poirot adjusted the tuning slowly. Between stations a thin hum emerged, steady, almost soothing. Poirot turned the dial again. Click, the hum stopped. Poirot turned it back. The hum returned. "This frequency," Poirot said, "is not meant for speech." Reeves swallowed. "Then what is it meant for?" Poirot's gaze was calm. "Confirmation," he said. Poirot stood and walked back toward the ballroom. He stopped beneath the clock. Tick, tick, tick. "Inspector," Poirot said gently, "tell me, during the masquerade, did the clock chime exactly on time?" Reeves frowned. "As far as anyone noticed." Poirot nodded. "And that," he said, "is the genius of it," Poirot explained patiently. "The wireless," he said, "could emit a low confirmation tone, inaudible to most guests, unnoticed beneath music, but audible enough to someone waiting for it." Reeves frowned. "You think Wexford heard it?" Poirot shook his head. "No," he said. "I think someone else did." Reeves' eyes widened. "The man above," he whispered. Poirot nodded. "The listener," Poirot said, "did not wait for the chime alone. He waited for the signal that told him the chime was imminent." Reeves exhaled slowly. "So the clock was not the only cue." Poirot smiled faintly. "No," he said. "It was merely the most visible one." Later that day, Poirot walked the gallery again, but this time he did not stand where the scuff marks had been. He stood farther back, where the sound would arrive first. He closed his eyes. He imagined the sequence. The wireless hum begins. The listener straightens, the clock prepares, the chime arrives, the victim acts. Poirot opened his eyes. "This," he murmured, "is choreography." Inspector Reeves joined him. "We traced the wireless modifications," Reeves said quietly. "Someone altered the tuning coil months ago, carefully, professionally." Poirot nodded. "And who had access?" Poirot asked. Reeves hesitated. "Julian Carew." Poirot's expression remained gentle. "Yes," he said, "a man who does not shout, who does not rush." Reeves clenched his jaw. "But what did the signal mean to him?" Poirot leaned on the balustrade. "It meant," he said, "that everything was still under control." That evening, Poirot asked Lady Maribel to join him beneath the clock. She arrived dressed simply now, without ornament, without mask. Her face looked tired, but honest. "You think Adrian was warned?" she said quietly. Poirot nodded. "Yes." She closed her eyes. "He feared Julian." Poirot waited. "Years ago," she continued, "Julian believed Adrian owed him something. Timing, opportunity, silence." Poirot nodded gently. "And when Adrian tried to step outside the schedule?" Poirot asked. Lady Maribel's voice dropped. "Julian reminded him," she said, "subtly." Poirot exhaled. "Yes," he murmured, "with signals." That night, Poirot waited alone in the ballroom. No candle burned, no music played. Only the clock remained. Tick, tick, tick. Poirot turned on the wireless. The hum emerged, softly. Poirot waited. At precisely 11:59, the hum shifted, barely. Poirot nodded. "Yes," he whispered. "There you are." The clock chimed. Poirot turned the wireless off. Silence returned. The signal had been uncovered, not by sound, but by habit. And habits, Poirot knew, were harder to deny than facts. When Inspector Reeves arrived the next morning, Poirot was ready. "The signal," Reeves said, "is enough to place Carew in control." Poirot nodded. "Yes," he said. "And control, Inspector, is motive." Reeves hesitated. "He never touched the poison." Poirot smiled faintly. "He never needed to," he said. "He only needed to decide when it was taken." Poirot packed his things later that day. The estate felt lighter now. The listening room stood empty, the gallery silent, the wireless inert. As Poirot prepared to depart, he stood once more beneath the clock. "This time," he thought, It is only a clock. He turned away. The signal no one noticed had been heard at last. Chapter 8. When the masks began to fall, when the truth approaches, it does not rush. It slows the room. It softens voices. It allows people just enough time to realize that something they have been holding tightly is no longer useful. At Thornhill Estate, that moment arrived quietly, without announcement, without accusation, without even a raised voice. Hercule Poirot believed this was the only way such a truth could arrive. The afternoon light entered the ballroom gently, illuminating corners that had not been meant for attention. Without masks, without music, without the choreography of celebration, the room appeared larger, almost vulnerable. Poirot stood near the long windows, watching servants remove the last traces of the masquerade. Streamers were folded, glassware was carried away. Chairs were aligned, not for elegance, but for storage. Each action returned the room to honesty. Inspector Reeves approached, his steps slower than usual. "Julian Caro has agreed to speak," he said quietly. Poirot nodded. "Yes, I expected he would." Reeves frowned. "He didn't ask for a solicitor." Poirot smiled faintly. "No," he said, "because he does not see this as a crime." They met Julian Caro in a small drawing room overlooking the gardens. The curtains were open, the light was unfiltered, there was no clock on the wall. Caro stood by the window, his posture composed, his hands folded behind his back in unconscious imitation of Poirot himself. He turned as they entered. "You found the signal," Caro said calmly. Poirot inclined his head. "Yes," Caro smiled slightly. "Clever." Poirot gestured toward the chairs. "Shall we sit?" Caro hesitated, only a fraction of a second, then complied. They sat opposite one another. No one spoke at first. Caro broke the silence. "You think I killed him?" he said. Poirot's voice was gentle. "I think you orchestrated him." Caro's smile faded. "That is not the same thing," Caro said. Poirot nodded. "No, it is more precise." Caro exhaled slowly. "Adrian was weak," he said. "He relied on cues, on permission." Poirot listened. "I taught him," Caro continued, "not to act until the moment was correct." Poirot nodded. "And that night?" Poirot asked softly. Caro's eyes drifted toward the window. "That night," he said, "he was meant to be free." Poirot raised an eyebrow slightly. "Free?" Poirot echoed. "Yes," Caro replied. "The masquerade, the masks, the ritual ending at midnight." Poirot's voice remained calm. "And the poison?" he asked. Caro tilted his head. "That was his choice." Poirot waited. "He knew it was there," Caro said. "He feared what would happen if he ignored the signal." Poirot leaned forward just slightly. "And you believed," Poirot said, "that fear absolved you." Caro said nothing. Inspector Reeves spoke carefully. "You modified the clock, the wireless, the gallery access?" Caro nodded. "I ensured consistency," he said. "People function best when the world behaves as expected." Poirot's eyes softened. "And when it does not?" Poirot asked. Caro hesitated. "That," he said quietly, "is when mistakes happen." Poirot nodded. "Yes," he said, "such as believing you could remain invisible." Caro's jaw tightened. "I never touched the poison," he said again. Poirot smiled faintly. "No," he agreed. "You did something far more dangerous." Caro looked up sharply. "You taught him when to die," Poirot said. The words landed gently, but they did not move. They stayed. Caro closed his eyes. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Caro laughed once, quietly. "I always wondered," he said, "if anyone would notice." Poirot tilted his head. "You wanted to be seen," Poirot said softly. Caro opened his eyes. "Yes," he admitted, "but only by someone who understood." Poirot met his gaze. "I understand," he said, "and that is why this ends now." Caro did not resist when Reeves rose. He did not protest. He simply stood and adjusted his cuffs, as though preparing to leave a room that had grown uncomfortable. As he was escorted out, he paused at the doorway. "You removed the clock," Caro said to Poirot. "Yes," Poirot replied. Caro nodded. "That was unsettling." Poirot smiled faintly. "Yes," he said. "Truth often is." That evening, Poirot returned once more to the ballroom. The estate was nearly empty now. The silence felt natural, not anticipatory. He stood beneath the clock which had been returned to the wall earlier that day, now ticking honestly without alteration. Tick, tick, tick. Poirot listened. Nothing followed. No signal, no expectation, no one waiting above. He closed his eyes briefly. The mask, he thought, has finally fallen. Later, Lady Maribel joined him. They are taking him away, she said quietly. Poirot nodded. I am relieved, she admitted, and ashamed. Poirot turned to her. Madame, he said gently, you hosted a masquerade, not a murder. She exhaled. He learned too much here, she said. Poirot nodded. Yes, he replied. But the house has learned something too. She raised an eyebrow. What? Poirot smiled faintly. That silence is not obedience, he said. It is simply space. That night Poirot slept soundly. No clocks commanded him, no signals interrupted his rest, only the ordinary sounds of an old house settling into itself. The masquerade was over, and Thornhill Estate at last belonged only to itself again. Chapter 9. Poirot listens. While others speak after the truth has been spoken, people feel an urgent need to explain themselves. They fill rooms with words. They rearrange events into stories they can live with. They speak not to be heard, but to convince themselves that what happened has a shape, a reason, a boundary. Hercule Poirot had long observed this instinct, and he had learned that the most important work often happened after the explanations began, when one listened not to what was said, but to what no longer needed to be defended. The small morning salon at Thornhill Estate was unusually full. Inspector Reeves sat at the center table with his notebook closed. Lady Maribel sat opposite him, hands folded neatly, her posture composed but softened. Dr. Selwyn Finch stood near the window, staring out at the lawns, as though distance might help him order his thoughts. Poirot occupied a chair slightly apart. He had chosen it deliberately. When people believed the questioning was over, they spoke more freely. I keep thinking, Dr. Finch said at last, that I should have seen it. Poirot did not look at him. What precisely? Poirot asked gently. Finch turned. Adrian's fear, his fixation on time. Poirot nodded. You saw it, he said. You simply did not know what it meant yet. Lady Maribel spoke quietly. He was always early, she said. Always checking. Even as a boy. Poirot inclined his head. People rarely invent their anxieties, he said. They inherit them. Inspector Reeves leaned back. And Julian Caro, he said. He never raised his voice, never threatened, never pushed. Poirot smiled faintly. No, he said. He did something far more effective. They looked at him. He waited, Poirot said, and taught others to wait. Outside, the estate continued its ordinary rhythms. Servants crossed the courtyard. Gardener trimmed hedges with steady patience. A distant bell marked the hour, not the ballroom clock, but a church somewhere beyond the hills. Poirot listened to it faintly through the open window. That bell, he said softly, rings whether anyone listens or not. Reeves glanced at him. Meaning? Poirot's eyes remained thoughtful. It means, he said, that time does not require obedience. Later that morning, Poirot walked the grounds alone. The path curved gently around the estate, past rose gardens now dormant and stone benches polished smooth by years of quiet use. Mist had lifted, leaving the air clean and cool. Poirot paused near a yew tree and closed his eyes. He listened, not for clocks, not for signals, but for the ordinary sounds of a place returning to itself. Footsteps in gravel, leaves stirring, a distant voice calling instructions that were practical, not commanding. He opened his eyes and smiled faintly. Yes, he murmured. It is finished. Inspector Reeves joined him near the edge of the lawn. You leave today? Reeves asked. Poirot nodded. Yes. Reeves hesitated. I keep thinking about something you said. Poirot turned slightly. You said Caro didn't kill Wexford, Reeves continued, that he orchestrated him. Poirot nodded. Yes, he said. Reeves frowned. That's a difficult thing for a court to understand. Poirot smiled faintly. But not impossible, he replied, especially when patterns are made visible. Reeves exhaled slowly. He believed timing gave him control, Reeves said. Poirot nodded. And control, Poirot said, is simply fear dressed as certainty. They walked back toward the house together. The ballroom doors stood open now, allowing daylight to wash across the polished floor. The space felt larger, less intentional, almost humble without its chandeliers lit. Poirot stepped inside one last time. He stood beneath the clock. Tick, tick, tick. Inspector Reeves watched him. "You still listen to it," Reeves said. Poirot smiled. "Yes," he replied, "but it does not speak to me anymore." Lady Maribel joined them. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly. Poirot inclined his head. "You did not have to dismantle everything," she continued. "You could have accused, demanded, exposed." Poirot looked at her kindly. "Madam," he said, "your house had already learned too much violence through silence. It did not need more noise." She nodded, her eyes bright. "I will never host another masquerade," she said. Poirot smiled faintly. "That is wise," he said. "Masks have a way of lingering." In the afternoon, Poirot packed his small valise. He folded each item carefully, as though respecting the quiet that had finally settled over Thornhill Estate. When he finished, he sat for a moment on the edge of the bed and listened. Nothing demanded his attention. That, he thought, was the mark of a case concluded. The motor car waited at the front drive. As Poirot stepped outside, the estate rose behind him, unchanged in shape, but altered in spirit. Inspector Reeves shook his hand. "You solved it," Reeves said. Poirot smiled gently. "No," he said. "I listened until it solved itself." Reeves watched him go. As the car pulled away, Poirot looked back once. The ballroom windows reflected the afternoon sky. The clock face was visible only faintly from this distance. It looked small now, appropriate. Poirot turned forward. Somewhere ahead, another train would wait. Another hotel room, another mystery that would begin not with noise, but with something subtle, something others ignored. And when it did, Poirot would listen. Chapter 10. The truth revealed at dawn. There is a sound that comes at the end of every night. It is not the cry of a bird. It is not the ring of a bell. It is not even silence. It is the sound of the world deciding to continue. At Thornhill Estate, that sound arrived just before dawn. The sky was still pale when Hercule Poirot stood at the tall window of the guest room, watching the horizon change its mind. The darkness did not retreat all at once. It softened first, then thinned, then allowed light to enter without protest. Below, the estate grounds lay quiet and obedient, not to authority, but to morning. Poirot adjusted his cuffs with habitual care. The case was finished, not because all questions had been answered, few ever were, but because nothing remained unfinished. The drawing-room was warm when Poirot entered. Inspector Reeves sat near the fire, his notebook closed for the first time since arriving at Thornhill. Lady Maribel stood near the mantelpiece, holding a cup of untouched tea. Dr. Finch sat quietly, no longer searching his thoughts for missed signs. They all looked up as Poirot entered. No one spoke immediately. Poirot did not sit. He stood near the center of the room, his hands folded gently before him, not in accusation, but in completion. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot said softly, "there is nothing more to discover." Lady Maribel exhaled slowly, as though she had been holding her breath for days. Inspector Reeves nodded. "Then we are finished?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Yes," he said. "We are finished, because the truth no longer requires defense." Poirot spoke calmly, without drama. "Adrian Wexford did not die because he was forced," Poirot said. "He died because he had been taught to obey." No one interrupted. "For years," Poirot continued, "he lived by signals, by moments when action was permitted and moments when it was forbidden. When those signals were removed, he felt exposed." Poirot's gaze drifted briefly toward the window. "Julian Caro did not poison him," Poirot said. "He did something more subtle." He paused. "He made the moment inevitable." Inspector Reeves nodded slowly. "The clock," Reeves said. "The wireless, the gallery." Poirot inclined his head. "Yes," he said. "A choreography of certainty," Dr. Finch whispered, and when midnight came, Poirot finished gently. "Mr. Wexford believed it was time." Lady Maribel's voice trembled slightly. "I invited them all here," she said. "I gave the house to the night." Poirot turned toward her. "Madame," he said kindly, "you gave them a masquerade." She looked up. They brought their habits with them. Her eyes filled, but she nodded. Outside, the first birds began their tentative calls, not synchronized, not instructed, not waiting for permission. Poirot listened. "That," he said softly, "is what freedom sounds like." An hour later, Julian Carew was escorted from the estate. He did not resist, he did not protest, he did not speak. As he passed through the doorway, he paused briefly, just long enough to glance toward the ballroom clock. It ticked steadily, tick, tick, tick. Carew frowned, not in anger, but confusion. The clock no longer spoke to him, and that, Poirot knew, was the final truth of the case. Poirot departed shortly after. His motorcar rolled down the gravel drive as the estate receded behind him. Unchanged in stone, altered in spirit. The windows reflected the morning sky. The clock face caught the light once, briefly, then vanished from view. Poirot closed his eyes. The case did not echo. It rested. Somewhere, far beyond Thornhill Estate, another clock chimed, not to command, not to warn, only to mark the passing of time. And no one waited for it. Old radio sign off. You have been listening to Hercule Mysteries, where every sound matters and every silence has meaning. Rest now, dear listener. The night has released its hold. This was Murder During the Midnight Masquerade at Thornhill Estate. End broadcast.